Welcome to the April 2nd, 2024 City Council Work Session meeting. Our meetings are public and you are welcome to join us in person or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whatever manner you feel most comfortable. This is a work session meeting during which there's no public comment. Please join us tonight during our 7 p.m. formal meeting to share your comments. We, of course, welcome your feedback anytime by mail to P.O. Box 145-476, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84114-5476, by email at council.comments@slcgov.com, or via our 24-hour phone comment line 801-535-7654. Comments we receive on agenda topics are shared with council members and posted to our website, slccouncil.com. We'll begin our work session with the first agenda item, which is updates from the administration. I have here that Tim and Andrew are going to be, but I see Michelle, so I'll take a Michelle. Do we have someone? No outreach update. We'll just go homelessness. Welcome, Michelle. That's an amazing necklace.
Thank you, council members. We have got a few very brief updates for you all today. We'll go to the next slide. All right.
Can you push the button on?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, yes, you can. Okay. All right. Thank you, council members. What you'll see here is a couple of brief updates for you. Shelter capacity is still pretty full right now. EIM this week with the county is going to be in the Folsom Trail, North Temple, Gadsby Trailhead, Archuleta Bridge area. That is going to be later this week. And then the rapid intervention team will be focused pretty heavily on the west side. They will be in the Cottonwood Park, Day Riverside Library area, the Riverside Park, and the Fife Wetlands. We have got a resource fair that is coming up on April 12th. That is going to be in Pioneer Park from 9:30 to 12:30. And then last but not least for you, we have got a hygiene kit drive that is going on right now. Tonight is going to be a kit assembly event, and that is going to be at the Sorensen Unity Center. The two links that you'll see here, the first link is our Amazon wish list. We are still taking donations for the hygiene kit drive. So if anybody is interested in donating, they can do so at that link. And then also just some updates on our general webpage about homelessness. This hygiene kit drive event is specifically to benefit the folks who are staying at the Geraldine King Center and at the Gail Miller. There will be a couple of barbecues that our team is working on putting together with the PD HRC squads. And those will be hosted at each of the HRCs and will be a distribution event then to give the hygiene kits to the folks who are staying in those facilities. That is what I have for you today.
Thank you so much. Council, any questions for Michelle? Thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll move on to our second ordinance regarding the ballpark station area rezone and text amendments. We're welcoming Nick Tarbett, but I've got Brooke Olson and John Anderson. Oh, Nick's virtual. We're choosing.
Can you hear me, Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'll just give a quick introduction and then turn it over to
Hang on,
planning.
Nick. Can you give us 1 second?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just got this advice a little bit ago, but I was told that I own property in this area, so I was told by the attorney's office that I should recuse myself. So I guess I'm going to leave.
All right. If you would make me a coffee while you're back there, please.
I'll make you a coffee,
Thank you.
send me your order, I'll be back.
Thank you. All right, Nick Tarbett, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. As you mentioned, this is the briefing on the proposed ballpark zoning amendments pertaining to the proposed MU8 zoning district. This proposal would do two things. It would rezone properties within this area to align with the goals, policies, and future land use recommendations of that plan. And then it would also establish the new zone, the form-based mixed use 8. There's an accompanying sign ordinance that is the next item on the agenda. And so we will be able to discuss these at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Council. Since Nick covered the details of the request, I would just like to reiterate that the Planning Commission recommended approval to the Council. And you can go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, and next slide, please. The city is proposing to rezone properties in 4 future land use areas specified in the Ballpark Station Area Plan, including a portion of the heart of the neighborhood, the Jefferson Park mixed-use area, and a portion of the Main Street and State Street areas. Next slide, please. The project area is predominantly zoned or a variety of commercial and moderate density multifamily residential zoning districts, the majority of which do not provide the development standards, density, and land uses specified in the plan. Next slide, please. The city is proposing new zones in the area to align with the plan, including the proposed MU8 Form-Based Mixed-Use 8 District, the FBUM1 Form-Based Urban Neighborhood 1, and FBUN2 Form-Based Urban Neighborhood 2. There's 2 properties located along 1400 South, which are owned by Salt Lake City Public Library and proposed to be rezoned from RMF 35 to PL Public Lands to accommodate the future development of a public library. The city is also proposing to exempt the proposed MU8 zone and the FBUN2 zone from the South State Street Corridor overlay, as the standards of the overlay are less restrictive. The city is proposing to preserve the existing PL and RMF 35 zoning of the ballpark properties, which will be considered in a second phase to align with the ballpark next community visioning process. The city is also proposing to preserve a small R1 5000 single-family residential zone north of Merrimack Avenue, the OS open space zoning and RMU zoning, and the Jefferson Park mixed-use area. Next slide, please. Next, I'll touch on the standards of the proposed zoning, starting with MU8. The MU8 zone is proposed to be mapped on the heart of the and Main Street and State Street areas. The proposed MU8 zone is a high-density form-based mixed-use district, which allows buildings up to 8 stories in height and a wide variety of uses. Next slide, please. The standards are form-based with a focus on building massing, scale, and placement, and the forms established in the zone include row house, multifamily, storefront, vertical mixed use, which I'll refer to as other forms. Some of the general development regulations include a maximum building height of 40 feet for row houses and 90 feet for all other forms. Development over 50 feet in height would be subject to the design review process, which is subject to Planning Commission review and approval. Next slide, please. The zone includes minimum open space area requirements of 25% of the footprint of the building for row houses and 25% of the lot area for other forms. The zone also includes open space design requirements to ensure the areas consist of vegetation and are usable by all future occupants on site. Next slide, please. The zone also includes a minimum sidewalk width requirements and specific ground floor use requirements for streets 66 feet or wider. And mailrooms and or leasing offices cannot count towards the requirement. Next slide, please. The zone is also subject to meeting a number of design standards as shown on the slide to help create, allow for the creation of quality pedestrian-oriented developments and also mitigate the height and density impacts on adjacent properties and properties located in lower density zones. It should also be noted an updated ordinance regarding the adoption of the MU8 zone is currently in the transmittal process, which includes several minor modifications to the proposed ordinance. Next slide, please. So next is FBUM1, which is proposed to be mapped in the heart of the neighborhood in Jefferson Park mixed-use areas. The zone generally allows for small-scale residential uses and building forms. And the standards of the zone are also form-based. Some of the general development regulations include a maximum building height of 30 feet, minimum open space requirement of 10% of the lot area, and the zone is also subject to a number of design standards. Next slide, please. Next is FBUN2, which is proposed to be mapped in all of the areas. The zone allows for a mix of uses and variety of building forms, and some of the general development regulations include a maximum building height of 50 feet. Open space area varies depending on the building form being developed. The zone is also subject to open space area design requirements and design standards. Next slide, please. As far as parking, the city's parking requirements vary by the context area of the zone and of the site. The MU8 and FBUN2 zones are located in the transit context, which includes zones that immediately surround mass transit or in the downtown core. These areas require minimal parking or may be exempt from minimum parking requirements. The FBUM1 is in the neighborhood context, which generally requires 1 space per dwelling unit. And overall, the proposal reduces the amount of parking required in the area. Next slide, please. The recently adopted affordable housing incentives were taken into account during the development of this proposal. The incentives allow an additional half-story up to 30 feet in the FBUN1 zone, and an additional story in the FBUN2 zone, and the incentives proposed for the MU8 zone would include allowing up to 2 additional stories in height and an administrative design review. Next slide, please. The Ballpark Next draft guiding principles were published in January 2024. As mentioned, the rezoning of the ballpark properties will be considered in a second phase. However, if there's a desire to implement the MU8 zone on either of the properties, the council should consider a modification to the proposed ordinance to allow several uses in the MU8 zone, which were identified in the Ballpark Next process. These uses were not specifically identified as permitted uses in the proposal reviewed by the Planning Commission, but the council may desire to add them to the proposed ordinance now. Next slide, please. As far as public input, the public input period began in June 2023, and members of the public voiced several concerns regarding the initial proposal. Significant modifications were made in July through October in response to the input received. Some of the major modifications included replacing the initial TSA zoning with the proposed MU8 zone and removal of the ballpark properties from the project scope to align with the Ballpark Next process. Since the modifications were made, members of the public have generally been in support of the proposal. Next slide, please. The Planning Commission held a public hearing in October and found the proposal complied with the applicable city standards and recommended approval to the City Council. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much. Council, any questions? So the reduction in parking, that is a reflection of the notion that by centering this community and the planning around that station, that we are encouraging people on transit and to use those modalities more, correct? We're trying to create. Do we have a livable schedule there for the transit?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Have a livable schedule there for the transit?
So the ballpark track station is one of the few stations where every single tracks line goes through. So at least getting to those stops, at least at 2100 South, and then through at least the courthouse, every train stops at every stop.
Okay.
So it actually has one of the
It is
higher
an
track
exceptional-
services in
Yeah, it's an exceptional experience there in the city.
And also the 9th South is one of those funded bus routes for every 15 minutes all week long. So.
Okay, so yeah, that's a very livable schedule.
Yeah.
Council? You can tell when Darren isn't here because the dissertation isn't given. I'm always in favor of height, and I think it's our only hope. So I would even potentially be more generous with height if there were a reason to, but.
Yeah, if I may add, Chair, this is Councilmember Lopez Chavez. In hearing thoughts with this community too and the different parcels that we see, not just housing, but as we prepare for a more commercialized or industrial placement too, with MU8 zoning. So I think in general, I've seen a lot of great courtesy from the community in building and finding this transformation and identifying with it. So for now, no further questions, but I think this is starting to reflect more of what we'd like to see the evolution of Ballpark. Thanks.
Councilmember Pui?
I was going to say one thing just in response is that if you look at that map, you can see we looked at every parcel individually, and Brooke did a really good job with moving this project through, but it was very much surgically done and not just blanketed over, so.
Councilmember?
I think that, I mean, it's exciting to see that the area plan is coming to fruition and we're making the changes to actually make this stream happen. So that to me is a good step in the right direction. I appreciate the administration's work on this and reaching out to so many people and to put so much thought into this area. And there is one of the policy questions in the packet that I flagged earlier today, which is about city-owned properties, which include the baseball stadium and the parking lot, proposed to stay as PL. And any some thoughts into that to explain that?
Yeah, so the reason why those were held out was because of the Ballpark Next process. And so our intent is to actually, as that gets further developed, come back with rezoning of those city-owned pieces as well, based on kind of the future vision for those two blocks.
So we're basically waiting for the process to pan out, and what is dreaming there, what we dream there, maybe we know better what kind of zoning will.
Yeah, and so we're actually going to start that fairly quickly here with the zoning side of things now that we have the guiding principles out and things like that. So that process will ramp up pretty soon.
Thank you. I know the neighbors will be very excited to see some of that happening. So thank you.
Well, and some of the public feedback we got was there was skepticism to the saying, why are you asking me what we want to see as you're pushing forward with the zone? And so that was a good chance for us to take a step back and say, hey, this is a future project.
Does the possibility that we may extend the Bees lease there interfere with your plans for it?
No.
The rest of it can
won't.
all unfold in a.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Council, any other questions?
If there's no more questions, the one thing that I will add that you may not have noticed this in the draft ordinance that's in front of you is that this is establishing a new chapter in our code. That chapter is set up to accommodate our zoning consolidation project that we've talked about. So that's consolidating all of the mixed use and commercial zones. So this is the first step in actually doing that.
That's very exciting. And I'm really excited that this seems to be a style of zoning that is actually responsive to our 21st century pressures and not trying to be pushed into every request that we get.
Yep, definitely.
Anything else? I think we're taking it easy on you all today.
Well, we do technically have a second briefing, but
We
it
have the
should be
sign
very,
part.
very quick.
Yeah, we're gonna keep this dream team here at the table, and we can just move then straight into the MU8, which kind of should have come before this.
And this one is
Like,
just signs. It was something that we had
Okay, just signs. Okay.
we had left out of the earlier transmittals. So
perfect. All right. Well then, yeah, let's go straight into this.
Madam Chair, may I ask you a quick question?
Yes, sir.
One of the other policy questions, and Plan, you can correct me if you don't need direction on this, but there was some additional uses that were recommended to be allowed in the MU8. I think we just need to get confirmation from the council that you're okay with adding those to the draft ordinance. Those were things such as stadium, amphitheater, health and fitness center, community rec
Yeah,
center.
the
a
amphitheater,
plaza.
formal and informal, health and fitness facility,
Yeah.
community recreation center, plaza and stadium. Council,
Yes.
any concerns about those sorts of uses in this?
Well, I think that matches still with the original visioning of the area, so I didn't have any concerns about it.
And then this is a zone that could be applied in other areas
That's the plan.
which haven't hosted these historically. So, okay. Cindy Lou, will you let me know if Councilmember Dugan wants to speak? I don't have a way to really indicate on here. Thank you. All right, with that, let's move on then to the sign regulations, please.
Okay. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. So this proposal is a zoning text amendment to establish on-site sign regulations for the proposed MU8 zone, and the Planning Commission recommended approval to the City Council. Next slide, please. To provide you with a summary, this proposal includes modifications to the sign regulations for the form-based zoning districts to also include regulations for form-based mixed-use districts. The modifications add the MU8 zone to the sign type specification tables as shown on the table in this slide. The table specifies sign quantity, size, and placement regulations for the various sign types permitted in the zone. And a variety of sign types are proposed for the MU8 zone, which are intended to provide appropriate signage primarily oriented to the pedestrian and mass transit, such as awning or canopy signs, nameplate signs, marquee, monument, flat, and projecting signs. Next slide, please. Thank you. The amendments also add the MU8 zone to the list of zoning districts where vintage signs can be relocated to for use as a piece of public art, subject to meeting specific requirements. Next slide, please. And the Planning Commission held a public hearing in January and found the proposal complied with the applicable city standards and recommended approval to the City Council. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Council, do you have any questions? Does this include electronic signage that we might see, or is that a totally different beast?
So it doesn't include the electronic signs. There are like internally illuminated signs such as neon signage that would be permitted, but the electronic signs are not included.
And would those be comprehended under a different ordinance? Are those always considered billboards or?
Not always. If they're on premise advertising the use that's there or the activities that are on that site, then they're just an on-premise sign.
Oh,
So-
I didn't know that. With MU8 zoning, is this also applying to MLB, NHL, ballpark areas?
So the ballpark itself, the Smiths Ballpark, has a sign overlay that applies to it. Same with the Delta Center. There is a proposal to have a similar sign overlay for the Salt Palace blocks. And so for any future, whether it's the Major League Baseball Stadium and that site, that would be something that would be need to be added. It can be done as part of that creation of the development agreement that we have to get done by the end of this year. It could also be added later once we know more about those types of signs. But that development agreement is the key piece in there, and that's where that would be the best place to address that.
Yeah, I hate to miss the opportunity to chime in on those electronic signs. I think they're going to become.
We are working on a text amendment to help clarify some of those rules and definitions and regulations, and it was just reviewed by the Planning Commission last week.
So this is just for like that cute little boutique trying to get you to come in. They can put the A-frame out, their 20% off thing, and.
Yeah, these are the basic
Okay.
sign regulations.
Councilmember Pui?
Just excited to know that there is a piece of this that talks about vintage signs. I shaking out some favors in the administration. No, that's not how it works. I wish it was, but there is a good sign saved from the North Temple, and it's someplace in the city for future use. And I appreciate the administration also on saving that for future relocation and use. But there is a lot of that we are seeing and losing across the city while we grow, and there's a lot of redevelopment. So I'm hoping that some of this helps us set the tone for future zoning changes, and this may apply in other zones. So I'm hoping to see some of that. So thank you.
Council, any other questions or concerns? We're just such an easy, nothing from Councilmember Dugan? We're just really easy to get along with today. Thank you all.
That's why it's always nice to be at the beginning of the agenda. Fresh.
I just wanted to say, we need to do some follow-up with the city attorney, whether Councilmember Mono is entirely recused or if he just needs to disclose. So we weren't able to do that today, so out of an abundance of caution, he's recused, but we will do that before the next conversation.
Thank you. All right, have a wonderful day.
Thank
and
you.
Let's invite Councilmember Mono back in, please. Council, we're running almost 25 minutes ahead. Thais is here, so we technically can go. I would just, yeah, let's keep moving. We'll wait for Councilmember Mono. While we're getting him, we'll start getting ready for the resolution regarding the North Point area annexation initiation. Nick Tarbett online will once again lead this with Thais Stewart from the City Recorder's Office. And we've got planning staff and attorneys who are gonna make sure we stay in our lane and do things the right way. All right, Nick, we've got our people here, so whenever you're ready to go.
Okay. All right. As you mentioned, this is the annexation process for the North Point, the area generally known as North Point, located along 2200 West in the northwestern part of the city. This resolution is only starting the annexation process. The annexation will eventually come back to the council for final approval, including the designating of the zoning and the properties annexed into the city. This will also go through a public process. Staff is proposing that the council consider adopting the resolution tonight that initiates the annexation process. And we would also set a public hearing for May 7th for the community to provide feedback to the council on. We have the Recorder's Office here who Thais is going to give an overview of the next steps and the process that the council will go through. And then, as you mentioned, planning staff is here if there's any questions about zoning. Thais, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi. Cindy Lou's making copies of this, but here are the next steps. If the resolution were to be adopted today, the next thing would be to start advertising for the public hearing, which would be on April 16th. The public hearing would be held on May 7th, and the protest period would actually start now and go through May 7th. After the protest period and the public hearing, the council would then have the option to adopt the ordinance. Once the ordinance is adopted and we have consent from Salt Lake County and North Salt Lake, since we have a specific area that is within both of our annexation plans, we have to have an agreement from both municipalities to annex that area. Then we can move forward with sending that information to the Lieutenant Governor's office. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Thais. Council members, do you have any questions? You all are being way too easy today. I don't know what's going on with you.
We might need some Red Bulls.
Yeah. All right.
Madam
so,
Chair, can I?
Yes, Nick.
I just wanted to make one point that I learned last week that I was not clear on, and Thais, you can step in and correct me when I'm wrong on this, but usually these annexation processes have to be completed in time for the Lieutenant Governor to be approved by the Lieutenant Governor every 6 months. I believe it's July and January, and a city-led process does not have to meet that deadline. So there was some concern, there was some thought that this would take until the latter half of this year, but this could be done by the end of June, potentially, depending on the amount of protests that the city receives.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. And that's exciting because we have more flexibility than we thought, which is exciting.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Dugan has a comment.
All right, Councilmember Dugan. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for the call. So my question, or just a refresher on the amendments as far as the zoning on 2200 West. Could you just kind of run through what we're looking at for those rezones, just for the public's information?
I can answer a little bit, and again, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong on this. When the council adopted the North Point Small Area Plan last year, the intent was that if any properties annexed into the city, they would be designated as Ag 2 until the new zone is created that planning is currently working on. They're in the very early stages of that, so it's probably a few months, potentially by the end of the year timeline for that to be completed. But until that's done, properties would come in under as Ag 2.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. All right, so at this point, are we straw polling? Is that what we need to do?
No, I don't know that you need to. I think there has to be a formal action, a formal vote on initiating the on the resolution.
Yeah. And that's on the agenda for tonight.
For tonight, okay. Thank you. Then I think it's fair to say we are prepared for that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Come on up, Grant.
Here. All right, so we will move ahead now to the ordinance regarding attached garages zoning text amendments. Brian Fulmer will be joining us as well as Grant Ammon and Kelsey Lindquist.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a proposal from the administration to update standards primarily for attached garages, but also includes design elements for attached structures, other attached structures, entrance landings, and building foundations. The text amendment would better align city code with state code. With that, I'll turn it over to Grant.
Okay. Good afternoon, council members. Thank you so much. My name is Grant Heyman, the city planning staff. Thank you, Brian. Just to reiterate, the text amendment is mostly in response to changes at the state level that sort of force this change at the city level. Any further proposed changes seek to simplify and maintain the current code. So we can go to the next slide. The Planning Commission saw this item in February and voted to send a positive recommendation. There was no public comment at that meeting. The state required updates are following HB 1003 from 2021, which prohibits design element requirements such as those listed. These requirements are primarily in R1 residential and FR foothills residential zones. These include restrictions on things like garage location, building colors, and roof materials. These updates are the bulk of this amendment. Next slide, please. But in addition, there are some lines of code that are being updated to increase clarification due to some confusion that we have had when working with citizens that is related to these updates. So we figured to include them. For example, the zoning ordinance uses the phrase required yard when discussing setbacks, but for some reason that word was not included in the FP and FR obstruction table, which has led to some confusion. That properties in these zones, in the FP and FR zones, would not be allowed any additional structures. This amendment fixes that confusion. Another confusion was arising on the replacement of a structure that was burned or destroyed, and another was found in determining the front line of the building when constructing an attached garage. This hinged on the definition of front line of building, which included uncovered porches, enabling owners to circumvent the purpose of the front line requirements. This amendment removes that confusion. And then a final confusion occurred when considering the rear of any non-square shaped primary residence. We can go to the next slide, sorry. Yeah, so you can kind of see this image here. This text amendment adds language and this diagram to our code, which indicates a clear interpretation of the rear of a principal building for primary structures with an unclear rear line. Also included in this amendment is the removal of language dictating foundation standards and entrance landings. This is because these regulations are extraneous and already addressed in building code. This is a city-initiated petition, so I will be happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. Council.
Just a quick understanding how this started. So this is in response to a state law and it's just to match the state law requirements with our ordinance. And so this doesn't make it more stringent than necessarily than the state law, or it does?
No, exactly. The state law is the bulk of this update, and it doesn't make it any more stringent than the state allows.
It's a very interesting thing that, there was a specific law about this specific topic. I wonder which legislator was affected by something like this, in which city, whose garage. But thank you for the update.
Are we concerned about anything that we're losing that we used to regulate?
No, and we don't really have a big say in it. The big purpose for why we had this in our code, specifically around foothills, is if you can imagine when you're looking up at the foothills, we were regulating things like roof materials so that when you'd look up at the foothills, a house wouldn't stick out and be overly white or overly bright. And so that any citizen could just focus on, the natural beauty. But that was removed. Our ability to regulate that, so
it's primarily aesthetic. We're not worried about any functionality or anything.
No.
Any other questions or concerns? Not even from Darren? I thought we were just being easy because he was in the back.
I'll say something, sure. No, I think it's also curious about this coming through a state ordinance, but just so that I'm clear, I know you probably already said this is affecting just detached garages, and does it have anything to do with primary residences and materials and colors on those?
Well, the state ordinance that was passed does regulate that, but our code does not. We already cleared that out.
Yeah, there are some provisions in the foothill zones that are impacted by that specific provision because they don't meet any of the exceptions in state code, which are basically areas developed primarily before 1950. So we did have regulations in the foothill zones to address color, mainly roofs, so that they weren't as reflective down into the valley and everything else. We can't enforce those anymore anyway.
Does it make it hard for us to enforce anything on historic districts?
No, if they're already created.
There's nothing in our code that would be in contrast with this?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Great, thanks.
All right. I think you got off easy on that one too. And we can, since the same team, Brian, Grant, and Kelsey, are here for the next one, let's move into the rezone at approximately 536 South and 200 West.
Thank you. This is a proposal to amend the zoning map for properties, 5 properties near the address you mentioned, which are currently zoned D2 or Downtown Support District. The request is to zone those D1 or Central Business District. Some council members may recall a similar rezone from D2 to D1 for adjacent property to the north, which was adopted by the council in July of last year. No development plans have been submitted at this point. I believe the petitioner is here and would like to address the council. And with that, I'll turn it over to Grant.
Cool. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, just to reiterate, we can go to the next slide, please. All right. Yeah, you can see here on the map the property highlighted in yellow. The properties that are in dark purple are D1, which is what is being proposed. That property directly north of the 5 subject properties that is D1 is the property that Brian was mentioning that a year ago you decided to rezone, approve rezone request. Abutting the subject properties to the north is a commercial office building approximately 50 feet in height. On the same block exists hotels, restaurant, commercial, and automotive maintenance uses. Across the street are multiple retail, commercial spaces, hotel apartments, things like that. Overall, the subject area consists of a variety of commercial uses and activity. While this change could allow for a larger future commercial development than what is existing, the impacts of the use and potential future redevelopment can generally be assumed because the commercial use has been continuous and the D1 development is present in the surrounding context. We can go to the next slide. And then, yeah, here's a couple of the differences between the zoning districts. I'm happy to go over some of those if requested. The main differences are height and land uses. To recap the Planning Commission meeting, staff recommended approval and Planning Commission forwarded a positive recommendation. Again, there was no public comment during that meeting, and there is no development proposal at this time for this site. The applicant did let me know that they would be in the audience, but it's looking like we might have been going a little bit quick. He might not be here yet, but I am happy to answer any questions, and then maybe if he comes in, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions as well.
Council? Nothing?
No, and I have a question. Is the property owned by the same entity as owns the corner parcel?
Yeah, that's a great
Already
question.
rezoned?
Could we go back a slide? Yeah, so you're talking about are the 5, because there are 5 properties involved, are the 5 properties involved owned by the same owner as that D1 property? Mm-hmm. That's the question. So the applicant is the same, it's Jason Bull. I had the same question. I guess what happened was the owners, or the owner of these 5 properties here saw what happened last year. They obviously are neighbors, and once they learned that the rezone request was successful, they reached out to Jason and said, hey, we heard this was successful. We want to do the same thing with our property. We think it's a good idea. So,
and the reason I ask is, if I'm not mistaken, D1 has a minimum height of 100 feet.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Which is hard to do on small parcels. So if they are owned and going to be developed as one piece, I could see that being possible. I don't know how you get a 100-foot tall building on that little L-shaped parcel. So I don't know if there's a way, but I wouldn't want to adopt a rezone that then makes a parcel unbuildable because of our minimum height requirement. So that's where I'm like, is there a way to say, I don't know if we want this, but say it's only rezoned if it's combined with the adjacent parcel, and if not, it stays as its current zoning?
So a property owner could go through the design review process for buildings less than
Lower
100
than 100 feet.
This is opposite, less than. And so the reason behind having that in there was we didn't want to fully shut the door on small buildings in our downtown, recognizing that some properties likely couldn't support on their own big tall buildings. And so we wanted to include that. So the idea is that design review is intended to look at those smaller buildings to make sure that, they may not have the height, but that they're achieving the goals and purposes of the D1 zone.
If they were trying to go under 100 feet, what would be the benefit of rezoning to D1 instead of D2?
They're really, well.
Is there setback differences? I mean, neither of them have density restrictions or parking requirements, right?
Well, one of the immediate ones is it makes those properties desirable for the property to the north as possible to purchase, but
Yeah, on an individual basis, that Venn diagram shows the differences in the 2 zones. There's not much that you couldn't, there's probably some more use restrictions in D1 as far as what's allowed in D2. D2 is a broader zone, but just less development potential. So that's probably a question for the applicant to decide why they want to do that.
I can offer this. We are running incredibly ahead of time right now, like nearly an hour.
Whoa.
So if you'd like, what we can do is take a 45-minute break and come back at 3:35 when this is actually scheduled to be on, at which point I believe the petitioner is likely to be here.
Yes, that's my understanding. And who knows? He might be watching and might be on his way. I haven't gotten anything.
Why don't we do that? Let's take, I know there's a couple extenuating circumstances for some of our council members, so let's take a little bit of a long now, which is what was scheduled. Let's come back at 35, spend about 10 minutes with the petitioner asking some questions. And then what I'd like to do is reorder the agenda a little bit so that at 3:45, we do what was listed last on the agenda, which is go over the demolition that happened over the weekend. And I'm extending that discussion time from 20 minutes to 45 minutes for us by starting at 3:45. With that discussion. Does that sound okay to everyone? And then we'll be back on track for all of the other external people who need to come in, like the animal services and all that.
Chair, might I suggest a quick change to that? Maybe,
Sure.
I don't know, just for the sake of efficiency and maybe, move things ahead. There is some announcements, I believe. We got them printed here in front of us. I wonder if we can get those through. And I think that Cindy just walked away, but I wonder if we can get those through ahead. But if not, it doesn't really matter. But I was just thinking what items we can.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and take the break then. Come back at 35. If the petitioner's here, then we can ask those questions. If not, can we go through you all? It sounds like we need some answers from that petitioner.
Sure.
So we'll either ask the petitioner and then we'll have more time for the demolition, which I anticipate most of us are going to want more time to ask questions about. And then we'll move with the rest of the agenda as stated. Does that work?
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Dugan's hand was raised.
Oh, Councilmember Dugan. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, before we take the break, my question is not really for the applicants, but more for the city council, in that this block was mostly D2. We approved a rezone of a corner of it to D1. We're looking to approve another section of this to D1. When do we stop taking this whole block from D2 to D1? And we need to think about the implications of these rezones, small, bite by bite, as this whole block then becomes a D1, because the lot next door was rezoned to D1. So I think it's more of a question for us to look at this rezoning and these applications.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. I'd also like to say thank you. Not enough Venn diagrams being used in presentations. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
All right, council and city, we'll take a break now until 35. We'll reconvene at 35 after. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience. Is this Jason?
It is.
All right, so we can continue with our rezone conversation at approximately 536 South, 200 West. I believe Councilmember Councilmember Mono, you had the questions most pertinent to the petitioner. So if you'd like to have the floor first.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering, it's a pretty small property for a D1 zone that has a minimum height of 100 feet. And so that seemed a little curious to me why we would rezone such a small property. And I'm just wondering what the plans are for combining it. Is there a plan to combine it with the other property? And if so, does that happen before or after this? And I guess I'm trying to figure out why I would rezone such a small parcel to D1 when D1 has a 100-foot minimum. And that seems a little bit odd to me.
It's a fair question, and I think maybe I was listening on YouTube as I was hurrying over. I turned on the meeting.
I should have said earlier that you did not have to speed. We would wait for you.
Pulling in the parking lot when you decided to take a recess, so I appreciate that. So I was able to hear the questions, and I think the question that Councilmember Dugan asked as well kind of goes to this. So in 2021, planning staff and the planning commission undertook an effort to redo the downtown zones. And in the initial outreach, there was consideration of modifying zoning districts as well as the zoning requirements. And so the property owner, as well as I believe the property owner on the corner, kind of watched those efforts as they went through the process for the modification. Ultimately, the zoning map was not amended. But from, I think, starting with those initial outreach, those initial conversations, and from what they interpreted as, the city's desire to continue pedestrian-oriented development further south, that kind of spurred some interest in them and looking at what may be possible with the property. There are no development plans that have been devised. I think, as was mentioned earlier in the meeting, the property owner on the corner referred this property owner to me, and so they have had conversations. What those conversations entailed, I don't know. But as the property owner of this property had looked through the zoning code and considered the options moving forward, they felt that D1 was most appropriate and what they wanted to move forward with as they looked at a potential redevelopment of their property.
Councilmember Mono, does that help answer some of your concerns?
It does. I think it brings up an interesting policy discussion for us, and I know Councilmember Wharton and I haven't always agreed on when it's appropriate to do a rezone, and if it's but I think it's interesting, and I don't know where I am on this, but I've been saying recently that, we are actually making a lot of progress on our zoning ordinances and consolidating our zones and making our zoning map and ordinance future thinking rather than sticking with what was appropriate in the 1990s but isn't appropriate now. And I think we are turning a corner to where we shouldn't just be approving one-off rezones all the time just because somebody asked for it, because D2 really does allow quite a bit of development. And I'm not saying this is what you said just now as the applicant, but in the case that the only reason for the rezone is to increase property value, I don't see that necessarily as a public good, just as I don't see a perceived or real reduction in a neighbor's property value as a valid reason to not approve a rezone that makes sense for the neighborhood. So I'm thinking this as I talk, so I'm not entirely sure, but it sort of seems like if they were owned by the same owner and there was a plan to build something that couldn't be built without this property, but it was going to be this great thing for that area, and the combination of the lots did make it a better development, that's where I feel like, yeah, okay, we can rezone this. But if it's just because one property owner wants to buy the property from another one and that person wants more money, so we need to rezone it first, I'm not sure that that's what we should be doing. And I think of another time when I didn't know that's what we were doing, but that's kind of what we did, which is the Coachman's rezone, where I was hopeful that, you know, the reason why I knew that we were going to be looking at that whole neighborhood, and we have been looking at that whole neighborhood for master plans and changes, but I was excited about approving that one because I thought it was going to be a development that we'd see, that we would have on the ground right now, and that would have been transformational and totally beneficial for this neighborhood. But as it turns out, we kind of just increased the land value, and now that property owner, it's been on the market for a really long time at a price that nobody's buying. And I know there's interest rates and there's all those sorts of other things. But I have a little bit of
I think that almost,
heartburn about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that almost begs the issue, because with interest rates, with the uncertainty that we're seeing in land deals, you rightly point out something that I wouldn't have caught, that this is potentially an undevelopable lot, except for that ability to combine with the other one in the D1.
On its own, it's more developable in D2 than
Right.
D1, I believe. I would totally be open to staff correcting me on that, but
Yeah, it's certainly a great discussion, and all of these are great points further down the line as well. A couple things. It is sort of still on a corner. Orchard Place is a little bit of an alleyway, and then certainly it's right next to that corner property that was rezoned. So I think there is something to be said for that. I also, during that short break, I do think it would be beneficial to sort of look at the code as well. Let me just read this. This is the height restrictions for buildings in the D1 zoning district. And this is, trying to find a section of code here, but quoting directly, it says, minimum building heights, this is where that minimum building height comes from. No building shall be less than 100 feet. Exceptions to the minimum height requirements are as follows: A, utility buildings; B, accessory buildings; C, buildings on lots or parcels that are less than 5,000 square feet in size; D, buildings with a footprint of less than 5,000 square feet; and E, buildings approved through the design review process that Nick was talking about. So there is a little bit of...
Okay, so there's a way that a building below 100 feet tall could be built. What is the maximum height in D2?
It's 120, yeah.
Okay, so what would be allowed under D1 if they were to use those exceptions and build below 100 feet, which I believe would be necessary if it was going to be developed on its own? What are the other differences between D2 and D1? Are there setback differences, parking differences, allowable use differences, et cetera?
Yeah. If I don't know if it's possible to
Can we pull up that presentation
back up,
again?
but that Venn diagram did have some of it. I would say my staff report does include all of those differences, and I guess we could maybe go over those here, but
I can just jump in. So D2, as Nick was mentioning earlier, slightly a broader zone and allows more uses than the D1. So D2 is slightly more permissive.
Are there any uses that are allowed in D1 that are not allowed in D2?
I can pull up the land use tables.
Yes.
There are more uses in D2.
And could council staff pull up the presentation
Please.
that we were looking at earlier? Sorry, Chair. Is it okay if I ask council staff to do that? Thank you. This is what I wanted to look at again.
Cool, yeah. So there you see the heights, and then land uses are at the bottom there. And there are quite a few differences as listed in my staff report, but those are some of the big ones that would be permitted in D2, but not in D1.
Yeah, I'm looking at the land use tables right now, and D2 is significantly more permissive than D1.
Just to finish my train of thinking from before, I also think there's a difference between what on Coachman's to this request. I still have some heartburn that we rezoned that and nothing's happened, and it's just been sitting there at a higher sales price than what it would have been before we rezoned it. But it was also corridor commercial zoning previously, which is vastly different than FBUN2, which we zoned it to. So it's like taking what I consider a pretty broken zone to something that's much more future proof. But these are not insignificant uses, but D2 to D1 is the same like category of zoning. And so I guess that's just where my thought is. I'm going to be interested in the public comment period on this. I guess that's where I'm at right now is I'm just weighing whether or not this
I do
makes
think
sense.
your policy discussion about what is the function of a rezone and the public good and realizing the vision of the city are good things for us to keep in our forefront as we consider. All right. Thank you so much for returning and for giving us time and answers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Did you have more you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, if I could real quick. So I think one of the things, you bring up a great question and concern about rezones. And I have to applaud Salt Lake City and the efforts you're making with the recent zone change and requirements and requiring community benefit agreements for zone changes as well as general plan amendments. And I think that gets really to the issue and concern that you have, that you're not just, in essence, a speculative rezone, but that there's community benefits identified. And as we were working through this process,
it's not rock and roll.
Yeah, wow.
So I think your staff and your planning commission is working through that policy, and I think it's a great policy. The goals of the D1 zone and the type of development, again, the property owner has gone through the code and considered what those goals are, what the intents are, and again, felt that the D1 was the appropriate zone as they look forward to potentially future development.
I guess I would be open to, like I said, I'm open to the public comment period, as I always am, but specifically on this one, I'm interested in what the public's going to say, but I'd also be interested in a little more specifics on that question of why D1 over D2, related to some of those questions of if it doesn't get consolidated, what do you build there that you couldn't already do in D2?
Councilmember Wharton?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate Councilmember Mono saying that. Everybody on this council has heard me say multiple times that I believe, even if it's not a specific community benefit, like that our neighbors are looking to us to say, with every decision, why does this make Salt Lake City or make our lives better? And it's hard for me evaluating this proposal because it doesn't sound like there are a specific design in place. There was not a design submitted, so I'm also trying to weigh in a very theoretical way about why this is about why D2 is better than D1 for a project that we don't have specifics on. So I also wonder that myself, like what is the community benefit? Why does this make Salt Lake City or this neighborhood better?
Yeah, and I think, again, a lot of it comes down to the level of intensity. The intensity of development in the D1 zone is greater than the D2 zone. And as mentioned before, when the work sessions happened around revising the downtown districts, this area was initially identified to be, this whole block, to be rezoned as D1. And so there appeared to be this intent and this desire to be able to expand those more intense uses to the south. And so that's, again, why the property owners had an interest in understanding that there was support in exploring more intense uses, and especially pedestrian-oriented, with the proximity to transit and the ability to expand the walkability further south of the downtown areas. I think that's where the advantage of the D1 zone versus the D2 zone comes in. The D2 zone is very autocentric. Those uses are very autocentric. In looking at expanding the walkability to the south, the D1 zone is the appropriate zone in order to expand that and intensify the uses to make those to make it viable.
So yeah, I'm glad you said that, because to me that's something
That is a difference.
different that's tangible that I can I'm not a planner like Darren is, so it might be harder for me to
Wannabe planner.
come up. Well,
I have no
Tanner,
accreditation.
you're planner adjacent.
yeah, I'm a lack of planner, and so that's helpful to me to. So if there are more of those kind of tangible things,
And also, I don't. Oh, sorry.
that's okay. That's helpful.
I don't need an answer right now unless you have one off the top of your head, staff. But I guess I'm interested now with that answer as to why it was proposed to D1 and at what point in the process it changed down to D2. That was us that did that?
No, I think what Mr. Bull's referring to is the downtown Building Heights project. There was some discussion internally of incorporating a map amendment as part of that project, but it did feel kind of beyond the scope. And so it was identified as potential future work to push D1 further south.
We did no map amendment. We only did text amendments.
Correct.
I remember. That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's a really nice, robust policy conversation. Thank you for presenting your case. Council, I would like to move on now, as stated before, with a reordering to item A13, the ordinance regarding the enforcement on work without a certificate of appropriateness zoning text amendment. I'm going to ask Brian Fulmer to say where he is. If Nick Norris is in the room or around, we'll take him. Amy Thompson and Blake Thomas. Blake, if you want to chill, you're welcome to, but you're also welcome to come and take a seat up here, whatever you prefer. But let's move ahead.
This is a proposal from the administration to amend sections of city code for work done without a certificate of appropriateness. It would address unlawful construction and demolition activities in the Historic Preservation Zoning District overlay to protect historic resources, including local historic districts and local landmark sites citywide. I'll turn it over to Amy.
Next slide, please. So as Brian mentioned, this is a city-initiated petition, and it impacts properties that are subject to the H Historic Preservation Overlay. Those properties include properties within a local historic district. Those are shown on the blue in the map. We currently have 16 new districts as of the last two that were adopted, and also landmark sites. The city has approximately 165 local landmark sites.
And it's just contributing structures within those districts, or all structures within a historic district?
So all structures within a historic district are subject to the overlay requirements, even if they're not.
Okay, thank you.
But there are different standards, as you know, for contributing versus non-contributing buildings. The purpose of this text amendment address unlawful construction and demolition activities in the H Historic Preservation Overlay. Next slide, please. So the zoning ordinance is not always equipped to handle this type of violation. You can see up on the photos on the right-hand side, the top photos of a picture in Boise, and that is a historic structure that was demolished, and the bottom is a landscaping violation of weed and debris. Right now, the enforcement is the same for both of those types of violations, but they are very different because one, you can replant landscaping and mow the lawn, and the other requires a lot more expensive solution. So the objective of these amendments is to change purpose of these amendments is to prevent and deter violations from happening in the first place, and if they do, to come up with tools that counter those violations. Next slide, please. So the proposed changes include creating an enforcement subsection within the H overlay. This would reference the enforcement chapter, which is 21A20, and it will list additional consequences for work conducted in violation of the historic overlay provisions. It also limits redevelopment. So if a building is demolished without approval, it limits any redevelopment on the site unless it's for reconstruction. So you demolish a property, you can either keep the site vacant for a period of 25 years, or your only option for development on the site is to reconstruct the building. It establishes a reconstruction process. This would follow specific standards to ensure that the new building is true to size, proportions, and features of the original structure. They would be required to sign a legally binding restrictive covenant acknowledging the use of the reconstruction process and prohibit demolition and major alterations on the site for a period of 25 years. That process would be consolidated with the recent process that council adopted for reconstruction of a carriage house. They are slightly different, of course, because one is someone is opting to reconstruct their carriage house, and the other is essentially that's the only option we're giving them, is to redevelop the property that was illegally demolished. And it clarifies that properties that conduct illegal work aren't eligible for the historic status determination that is outlined in Chapter 21A 34020. That process essentially allows for an administrative determination for a property to argue whether or not they're contributing or not. So if someone does a violation that is irreversible, they can't then apply for the determination, the historic status determination, and then be under those different standards for non-contributing buildings. It also clarifies that if someone demolishes a building or has, they aren't eligible to go through that economic hardship process. So the economic hardship process kicks in for contributing structures that are denied demolition, or if it is a landmark site and they apply for demolition, that process automatically kicks in. So it would make them not eligible for economic hardship because it's essentially self-imposed. And then finally, changes to related sections. Those include definitions, as well as adding changes to the non-conforming use and non-complying structures chapter. Essentially, if there was an existing duplex, let's say, that was demolished illegally, that was in a zone that didn't allow for duplexes, that would allow them to reconstruct, if that's the path that they chose, and reinstate the duplex that was there before that. Next slide, please. I want to mention that there's also some proposed related changes under a separate text amendment. These are coming forward with the text amendment. I believe it's called the Title 18 changes, but I'm not 100% positive on that. But essentially, that text amendment would add some new fees or increase fees for work conducted without a certificate of appropriateness. So it would add a new fee for work without a COA, and that includes partial demolition of a contributing structure or full or partial demolition of a contributing structure, and that is $250 a day. Again, that's a new fee. It would increase the boarded building fee. Right now it's $1,560, and it would be increased to $14,000. An enhanced fee for boarding of contributing structures, that is also a new fee. That would be $14,850. A new fee for stop work orders.
That's a one-time fee, right?
What was that? The stop work order?
The one before it. Boarded, yeah.
I think that is a yearly fee.
And is that in addition to the $14,000 boarded building fee, or it just goes from $14,000 to $14,850?
I think it's
I think it's different. So they wouldn't be charged both. If it's a contributing building, I believe they're charged the $14,850. If it's not a contributing building or just a building outside of the overlay, I think that's just the $14,000. It's not $24,850 or whatever that is added together.
The other things.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think that we've approved the increased boarded building fee yet, right? That's something that we're
No, these
still
are
going to
coming
discuss.
forward with Title 18, and they are in the transmittal process, I believe.
And
Okay.
are these costs justified as high as they can go?
I do not know.
I'm getting a thumbs up from.
Yes.
Small claims is up to $15,000. So I believe when I was in the briefing, that's what it was.
There's a different way to ask the question. Sometimes we calculate the fully loaded cost, and then we charge a percentage of it. And maybe what they're saying in this case is that they are recommending that you charge 100% of the fully loaded cost. That's right, Blake? Okay, that's what they're doing. So that is the max, yeah.
I'm interested in, if someone purchases a historic landmark, their ownership of that should be conceptually different than when you build a house or do something. You are a steward over a segment of our history for the time that you own it, and you are agreeing to be a faithful steward so that the future generation can have their chance at stewardship. That is materially different. The responsibility is different. I don't own a historic structure because I do not have the financial resources to maintain one. It is something that should be a little more specialized, that should be taken with more gravity. And we've seen how it is way too flippant. And with the onset of Olympics and MLB and NHL and growth trajectories, our shared history is at increased risk of being subject to oopsies and better to ask forgiveness than permission. And I think anything we can do to cause a cost-benefit analysis that disproportionately sways towards preservation is something I'm interested in, even if that means we pursue historic things outside of small claims court. Councilmember Mono.
Yes, all of those things you said. Plus, I am wondering if it would be something. Okay, I'll just say I would be interested in maybe looking at a different set of standards for any building in a local historic district versus a locally landmarked building, because I feel like a locally landmarked building it's not even in a district, but we're saying that particular structure is so valuable that I would even, if there's a way to even do increased restrictions on those ones over, because, there are local historic districts where a property could be far less significant within that district and others, but the landmarked building, has gone through a process to say that specific building is of higher importance. So I would be interested in maybe looking at two ways to treat those if it's possible, or maybe they're treated the same way, but the ones that are specific landmarked buildings, to me, that's an even higher level of scrutiny, because it's not like we looked at this whole neighborhood and said this neighborhood's great and we like the character of it. It's like this specific structure is valuable to us as a community and to whoever chose to landmark it in the first place, which correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we can just go landmark a building unless the property owner at the time wants it to be,
correct,
is approving of that or requesting that, right? So it's whoever owned the building at the time went through the process to say, this building, these specific studs and bricks are of historic value and I'm going to prove that. And then it was proved. Like that's to me a higher level of standard than even a building, whether it's contributing or not, in a local historic district that hasn't been specifically landmarked.
Councilmember Pui, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to think through this a little better. Obviously, it is important that the city to note, and I miss a few minutes of this beginning, so I might have missed that. But it's important to note, for the record, that these conversations I've been having, and the administration has been working through this process for months and months now, and it's gone through all the stages that they needed to be to beef up an ordinance that needed to be updated for a long, long time. And maybe we are in the middle of an example that exemplifies the need for this. But I just wanted to say that I wonder if there is a potential to find out if there is a way, going around my words to come up to the point, when a contributing structure like a landmark building could be assessed. I know that there is some landowners that own these structures that may or may not let them rot to basically qualify for a demolition, because there is some circumstances where a demolition is permitted if the building is unsafe and so on so forth. And I want to find out if there is a way for us to be proactive in protecting these structures or creating a standard. So this is where it is right now. And it's expected that this structure is maintained watertight, right? Like, if not, we know that if it's not kept watertight, it's going to decay very fast. So I'm wondering if there is a way, a mechanism for the city to assess this contributing
beyond the boarded structure.
Yeah, because just boarding a building doesn't necessarily protect it from what it needs to be. Just letting the roof rot will probably end up in a building that may need to be demolished, and that was maybe done by negligence to qualify for a demolition. So it's a workaround to the protecting of the structure.
I see Councilmember Wharton has his light on, but do you have more slides too that we kind of like got dead-ended here?
I do. It's okay. We can definitely go through these questions. And
let's give Councilmember Wharton then.
Thank you. Second, everything that that the chair said about how ownership of a historic structure is different, that you are more of a steward than a typical owner, and I really want the very recent example of the Fifth Ward is just one example, but I think everybody has something in their district, and everybody in Salt Lake has a building or something that when something like this happens, it is traumatic, and it takes away it feels like a piece of you or a piece of something that's important to you is being stolen, and you're being robbed of that. And that's why we have these laws to put these to go through the process to designate for the community to say, yes, this is still a private piece of property, but it's so significant that we have an interest in it as well. And I think that our fees really need to reflect that loss. And so sorry, that was a long intro to how do we arrive at 250 a day? Like, why is that the number? Because I don't know if I don't know what the parameters are on like what's the maximum you can charge or what's how you typically calculate these, but I want it to be that it's not something that if I'm not acting in good faith and I'm going to buy a historic property, that I can figure 250 a day in the margins of my project and still have there be some sort of way for me to demolish if I'm willing to pay, whatever amount. And I think it also kind of goes to, I understand the other changes that you put in place saying like, you won't be allowed to rebuild anything on this. Your options are rebuild the structure or do nothing for 25 years. I get that that's like a piece of it, but I also want to have situations like where there's been a partial demo and they're just going to sit on it for a really long time, and they're going to figure in the $250 a day into their overall costs. So, super long question, but why is that the number?
Could I add to your question, Councilor Wharton?
Sure.
I would also wonder if it could relate to the assessed value of the property, because 250 a day could be pretty significant. That's 91,000 a year. That could be pretty significant for some properties, but also not significant for other bigger properties. So could it be we take the county assessed value and we say it's a minimum of this or a percentage of it, whichever is greater or something like that?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's legal.
Yeah, I don't know if that's legal either. We'll wait till Catherine answers the question. In terms of just how we came up with the 250, right now there's not a fee at all. And we did do a bunch of research on other cities, and what we found was that fees alone were not helpful. There's an example on a later slide that I have here that kind of demonstrates that. So what we tried to do was couple them with the limitations on redevelopment, because we're trying to think, why are people doing this? Mm-hmm. Probably because they think the development potential of the property is much more valuable than the building that's on it. Mm-hmm. And so what can we do to counteract that? And that's where we came to, if you demolish it, then you can either rebuild it or it can sit there for a long period of time. And we proposed 25 years. The Landmark Commission actually asked for a consideration of 50 years, and the Planning Commission did not agree with that, and they ultimately decided to just move forward with the 25 instead of the 50.
Could we also add a clause that you have to use the historic materials in the rebuild as possible?
Yes, so in terms of the reconstruction process that's proposed, it is in line with the Secretary of Interior standards for reconstruction, and so it does deal with all of that in terms of proportions, materials, subject to availability of some things, regardless of materials and use. Even just craftsmanship is not the same now as it was, but
no vinyl windows.
Yes.
Sorry.
I'll tackle the demolition by neglect comment question. That does happen. We have property owners that leave their buildings either boarded or accessible, and they become in various states of disrepair. Those buildings are not necessarily eligible for economic hardship because they've been neglected, right? And that's typically self-imposed. The buildings that you do see lost, especially in Central City, are due to fire, and those are hazardous, right? So those buildings have to come down in an emergency state, and those are typically approved by the building official. We know that demolition by neglect is a huge concern, and we are working on an ordinance to address demolition by neglect. So,
yeah, my heart will never be the same after living through Bishop Place and watching what happened.
That's exactly.
You and me both.
and then having a boat issue being the reason why economic hardship was granted.
Yes. But so why is it 250 again?
Because the fees alone weren't enough, and it's being paired with.
But why do we land on that number?
I can't remember why we landed on 250. I could pull up the previous. Yeah, here's Nick.
So we landed on that based on what other cities with similar ordinances related to preservation were. So there is some precedent out there.
Council members, we are approaching time on this. Anyone else have anything?
I had a question real quick, if I may, in regards to the economic hardship. In understanding the amendments, then you would agree that the updated resolution doesn't allow for people to misuse that policy. Okay, that's good, because that is a concern in recent affairs that is likely to be used and weaponized against these historic contributing buildings. So.
Mm-hmm. It's a significantly stringent standard to meet.
We want to give you all a chance to get through the rest of your slides.
I was just going to ask if we could go to if I could see the rest. If we could see the rest of the slides.
Yes, if you would like to see them, I can definitely skip over some, and I kind of covered some as we answered questions. So next slide, please. So in terms of the considerations we looked at, it's the enforcement limitations, additional tools, city policies and goals, and then feedback received from the Historic Landmark Commission and the Planning Commission. Next slide, please. So as we've talked about, some of the enforcement limitations are buildings that are within a historic district, historic resources, are a lot different than just a regular building in terms of enforcement. If somebody were to take the roof off of that example in the top, the solution is to put the roof back on, as well as a stop work order, fines, and a certificate of noncompliance. In the second row, the house is there, now it is not there. We issue a stop work order, certificate of noncompliance, fines. They can go through the demo process retroactively, but there's still no building there. So it's kind of this circular process that needs a more tailored approach. Next slide, please. Again, the additional tools that we're looking at with this ordinance are to restrict future redevelopment, prevent greater development potential, add some additional costs, and then essentially just have an unfavorable outcome for the person that has done illegal work. This example on the bottom here is from New Orleans, and essentially the structural integrity of this building was compromised when work began without permits, and as a result, the commission $10,000 fine, and the development company responsible for the demolition promptly paid that before subdividing the lot and constructing 2 new homes advertised at more than $1 million each. So again, it's just, fines are a lot of times the cost of doing business. Next slide, please. The proposal is consistent with city goals and policies, specifically Salt Lake City's community preservation plan and policies outlined in Plan Salt Lake, specifically preservation, the guiding principle. Next slide, please. We did receive a number of questions and feedback from the Historic Landmark Commission during the 2 briefings that were held. I don't have to go into those in great detail if the commission or if the council wants to look at the reports that were done, or I'm happy to if you'd like me to go into that detail, but for the sake of time, we'll go on to the next slide. Briefings were held with the HLC and the Planning Commission, as well as public hearings. We did receive a few public comments, generally in support of the proposal. Some public comments related to noticing and awareness of people being in a local historic district. Next slide, please. And then finally, both Planning Commission and Landmark Commission recommended forwarding a positive recommendation to the council. The HLC did ask for consideration of increasing the 25-year limitation on redevelopment to 50 years, as well as exploring a fee for vacant properties. So if someone decides not to go forward with the reconstruction, having an additional fee just to leave the property vacant for that period of time.
Yeah.
Ultimately, Planning Commission did not agree with those considerations, and so the proposal was just forwarded as initially recommended.
Thank you. Councilmember Dugan?
Slide.
Oh, you have more?
No, that's the last slide, sorry.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to go back to the fine discussion we had. And I know we're talking about fines, and these are always after action fine. I mean, the action has already happened, and we're fined for actions that they took, and they get fined. And you also mentioned made the comment of, hey, some of this is just the fines are just the price of doing business. And I'm going to step back a little bit on these whole fines and say, we see this also in residential homes areas where someone works without a work permit, or they build a little bit too high, they build a little too wide, they build something here and that, and then they pay the $1,000 fine and they move on, and they don't really get penalized for that. In this case, they knock down a building, they'll take a fine. So my question is, how often or how many times do we allow a developer to do something that's without a work permit, against our rules and regulations, and allow them to continue doing work? and I look at the fines and going $250 a day or 10% of $1,000 up to $1,000. Is there an idea that says, hey, in something that's as serious as this demolition, the fine's not $250 a day, but it's also, hey, you're not allowed to do business in the city for another year. And that's a harsh, maybe I'm being way too harsh here, but that's a harsh penalty for someone because that's their business side of the house. But also, look what the damages they did to the city, and look what the damages they did for us. So I'm pushing for a little bit more of a firmer fine, and maybe even a possibly, a developer gets one chance in this case, and in some of these cases, he shouldn't even get one chance because he knows the rules. He's always just bending them, consistently bending them. So that's my point here on the fines. I think sometimes we may need to go a little firmer than what we have right now.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Wharton?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I definitely would be in favor of exploring a charge for vacant property, because I think the only thing that in some ways that adds insult to injury when you have lost something and then there's just nothing there. So I really want to incentivize that. If there's a way to still do that with, I understand the reason for the saying you can't build anything for 25 years, but I would be interested in exploring a charge for that. Thanks.
Councilmember Pui, quickly.
Very quickly, I just wonder if there is a way of I know that this seems onerous and expensive and a lot of work, but these buildings are significant, and I think that's hashed, I don't have to rehash that, but do a slow assessment as a city about these local listings and the building ones, and maybe go through that list and say, okay, let's go check out, and I just opened the list. Let's go check out Best Cannon House on, whatever the address is, and created, a year report. And we went through 10 houses this year, and not all of them, but eventually to have a point to know where they stand. I mean, if not, we don't know where they are. And I mean, we know physically where they are, but we don't know the status and how well kept they are or not. I think that would be interesting in taking this opportunity to look at them.
Okay. All right, I'm really glad that we gave ourselves more time than just 20 minutes to discuss that. Before we close this out, I want to say thank you to the city staff. Like, your response this weekend was remarkable. Like any Sunday that would have been remarkable, but Easter Sunday in particular, thank you for paying attention, for being so proactive, for being ready to go. As a former member of the Historic Landmark Committee, as the mom of emerging Utahns, I'm really thankful that you all are protecting the legacy that we have here. And so I'm really proud to be a part of the Salt Lake City apparatus. So thank you. All right, and thank you. That's that. All right, now we will move on to an informational update from the Salt Lake County Animal Services. We'll hear their annual report. Sylvia Richards from the Council Policy Analyst will come. Talia Butler, the Animal Services Division Director, and Carrie Siebert, Contracts and Program Coordinator, are here to join us.
Just a very quick introduction, and I'll turn the time over to Talia and Carrie. As the council is aware, Salt Lake City has contracted with Animal Services since 1991. And just one item that I wanted to bring up, and that is that last year, the county indicated that there's a proposed new animal care campus, and the county is currently conducting a survey in its third phase, and that's something that you might want to ask Carrie and Talia about. So with that, I'll turn the time over to them. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Carrie, and I'll be presenting your annual report. There's quite a bit of info here, so I'll try to rush through it, but please feel free to ask me questions at any point. Go to the next slide.
Just verbally prompt when you want to go.
Oh, okay. So 2023, it was a big year for us. Many years ago, we made the move to take steps towards becoming a no-kill shelter. This is quite a feat for a shelter to achieve, but 2023 was our official decade of achieving no-kill status. This is a very rare feat for a municipal shelter, so we're very proud of it. So we were celebrating it as it is our first anniversary. Part of it, we wanted to honor those that have shown us support throughout the 10 years and have awards given out to organizations and individuals at our Spaghetti Gala. Salt Lake City being one of the recipients of these awards, as you guys have supported us through all these years, as Sylvia has mentioned. So without your guys' support, it would have been hard for us to sustain this goal of ours. In addition, we also launched our Hang 10 Shelter Club. So this is a movement. We want to help spread the no-kill movement to other shelters, not only in Utah, but around the nation. So we're challenging other shelters to be part of our club and ride the wave of no-kill. And we also have our awesome merchandise, as you can see Talia displaying it in the picture below. And you can move to the next slide. Just some interesting highlights. So we have many features in our shelter that are unique to us. One of which being we have an in-house shelter or clinic that's fully staffed. We did over 3,500 sterilizations in our clinic. Our animal control officers are 24/7 and handled over 18,000 calls for service. And we have a robust foster and volunteer program that was able to provide over 43,000 hours of care to pets in the shelter as well as those in foster homes. And we were able to get over 2,600 pets into rescue organizations and adopted new homes. Next slide. Other accomplishments, we won our 15th Best in State Award, and we also received some achievement awards from the National Association of Counties, one being for our advisory committee, which Carmen Bailey serves as a member on. And this is a committee made up of all of our jurisdictions that we serve, so everybody is on the same page, everybody has a voice in our operations and programs. And the other achievement award was for our FACES endowment. FACES was one of the programs that started out to help us achieve our no-kill mission. And they provided funding for many of our programs that we have now today. And one of their last efforts to help us maintain this status was giving us an endowment that we can now survive on and help fund many of our life-saving programs. Next slide. So now we'll move into some statistics. So hope you like numbers. This is our overall Asilomar stats. So it's showing our intake totals, and this is overall for all of our jurisdictions. We brought in just over 6,200 animals into our shelter in various ways and outcomed them through adoptions, transferring into rescue, redeeming them back to owners. We do have some euthanasia, as no-kill is 90% released positively out into the community. So you can see our outcome totals was just over 6,000 as well. Now these are adjusted totals. The only numbers that are adjusted out are ones that we have no control over. So for example, an owner requested euthanasia that was not treatable, or deceased on arrivals, anything where we really don't have any control over that outcome. Next slide. So with that, with all the movements that we've had with positive outcomes with the animals, we achieved a 93% live release rate. Part of that being 673 animals that were sent to rescue organizations and 1,281 that were sent into foster homes until they were able to be adopted. Next slide. For Salt Lake City's intake, of those 6,000 animals, a little over 3,000 came in through Salt Lake City specifically. And you can see the various types of animals we get in. We take in just about everything. And with our most popular, of course, being cats and dogs, but we do get in occasionally some reptiles, small mammals, livestock, various animals. You never know what we're going to get in. Next slide. The method that these animals came in vary, most commonly through ACO impound, which means they were impounded through our officers. The other most popular being strays, where the public has brought them directly to the shelter. Next slide. Our field statistics, as I mentioned, we handled over 18,000 calls, with just under almost 7,000 of those being in Salt Lake City specifically. We have the various types of calls that we take with varying priority levels. Most commonly, we get animal impounds, where someone has an animal contained and our officers go out to pick it up, or one that's running at large that our officers will then try to catch. Citizen inquiry is a popular one as well, where public can come in and request information, ask various questions, or potentially report a situation that they're encountering. Next slide. With violations, we issue either a civil notice of violation all the way up to a criminal citation. Most common violations are the three listed: running at large, no license, or no rabies. With notice of violations, we tend to issue those more, as it's an educational tool that we can use at varying levels depending on if they're repeat offenders or not. Most often we can do it as simple warning all the way up to increased fines. Depending on the severity of the case, we can jump to a criminal citation or an increased level of notice of violation, depending on case details. Next slide. With licenses, we have our sterilized licenses. That tends to be the most common, as we try to push our spay and neuter program quite a bit. We had just over 4,600 licenses sold. Unsterilized, we still encounter quite a few of those, and we offer resources if they're interested in getting them sterilized. And senior sterilized, that's where we offer a discounted rate for those senior citizens. Dangerous dog, that is a different variation on a license, as those are ones that have to obtain a pretty stringent permit if their dog qualifies as a dangerous animal, given a history of aggression. And residential permits, those most often are like chicken permits. Next slide. The Urban Wildlife Program, this is a program that is managed and operated by the USDA. Salt Lake County Animal Services serves as a pass-through on this contract, so these are statistics that were provided by the USDA. This is specific to raccoons and skunks, so where they'll educate the public as well as come out and trap and remove. So in Salt Lake City for 2023, they had personal consultations 8 times, quite a few that were either written or phone consultations. Direct control is where they actually go out and trap. So they had 190 raccoons that were removed, as well as 109 striped skunks. Next slide. We always like to highlight our officers, and our officers of the year for last year, we'd like to highlight our 2 sergeants, Lacey Fett and Jose Martinez. They're out on the road every week, every day, trying to keep our officers in line, also managing the queue to ensure all our calls that we received are handled in a timely manner and based off the appropriate priority. We also like to highlight one of our newer officers, Taylor. She has been essential and crucial in many of our cruelty investigations recently. She has a lot of skills in her investigations. She was actually assisting on a high-profile case that assisted the police and FBI. When we encountered an abandoned dog, she did over and above her tasks to help assist them in obtaining an individual that was wanted out of state for a double homicide. Without her work, they would never have been able to obtain him. She was able to gain trust through the contacts. So without her work, this individual wouldn't have been caught. So we definitely want to highlight her for that. She's been a great addition to our team. Next slide. So to highlight some of our other programs that have been essential, volunteers is always a huge one. There's quite a few numbers here, but I'll highlight a few of them as it also provides a variety of the different programs we take volunteers on. Basically, anyone out in the community that has a skill, we can use it. We have photographers, handymen, event coordinators, all sorts. So some of the programs, like our Hounds Around Town, that is one of our most popular, where we have skilled volunteers that have been trained. They come to the shelter, take one of our adoptables, take them out on field trips around the community, on trails, to coffee shops to get a puppuccino, but not only does it provide enrichment, gives them fresh air, exercise, but they're also highlighting that that animal is adoptable. They can answer any questions when the citizen encounters the animal and hopefully get it adopted. Making treats for our shelter pets, one of the big important things with the animals in our shelter, they tend to be there for a while because we want to provide them the best outcomes possible. So to help keep them physically and mentally enriched, we do provide doggy popsicles, puzzle treats, frozen Kongs to help work their mind in the kennel so they don't get a little stir crazy. So we have many groups that come in, some of them being school groups, children groups that come in and help make enrichment for our pets. And another big program is our Book Buddies, where children will come in to read to our shelter cats. This is a year-round program. It's great for the summer if you're looking for something for your kids to do. The children come in with their parent or guardians, come in our colony rooms. It not only promotes reading amongst our youth, but it provides enrichments to the cats in the shelter. The reading is a calming effect on the cats, as well as they get human contact and enrichment through that. And then we have a lot of partnerships with outside organizations and local groomers. And so they offer free grooming to some of our shelter pets, especially if they come in not the greatest condition. We want to have the best outcome, so they will provide free grooming appointments, and we rely a lot on our volunteers to transport them there. So throughout their work, and this is just highlighting a few of the activities that volunteers help us with, so we always want to honor them. Next slide. And our outreach team not only manages our volunteer program, they manage many of our programs that have assisted us with being no-kill, one of which being events. We did 49 hosted or attended events. This could be anywhere from city events like Yappy Hour that we participate in, to Nights Out Against Crime. Any of those events that you want us to participate in, just let us know and we'll get it on our schedule. We also provided 95 adoption events and citizens educated on programs. This could be directly at our shelter, at events, through our humane education program, which is a popular one with schools. Our pet pantry is another one of our popular programs. We know there's many people out there that are struggling financially. We don't want them to have to worry about their pets in their home. So through the pet pantry, this is a monthly event that we host. It's free. The public can come to these events, let us know what they got. We'll load them up with food that's been either donated or purchased through grants. If we have some pet supplies on hand that they could use, we will give them that. We want to make sure the pets in the community are well taken care of so they can not have that burden on their back. And then donations, we receive many donations, whether it's in kind or monetary. Through our events, a lot of our fundraising department, we host our Spaghetti Gala, which is an amazing event, and we have it every single year. It'll probably be around October this year, but if you're interested in attending, you'll have a great time. Let us know and we'd be happy to have you there with us. But through these events, our outreach department alone was able to raise over $192,000. We also were able to receive many donations directly into the shelter, which brought the total to, I believe, over $300,000 for 2023. Those funds go directly into many of our donation funds, whether it's injured animals, spay and neuter, adoption programs to help promote our no-kill mission. Next slide. And even though these have come and passed, this was just highlighting a few of our free workshops. This is also a monthly thing. We have a variety of topics. They're all free. Many of them are virtual, so anyone can join in and sign up. These are essential resources that we'd like to provide the citizens. Many of them are encountering maybe minor behavioral issues that can be easily fixed. We'd rather them be able to fix those in the home than have to resort to bringing that animal to a shelter. So we have anywhere from bite prevention, separation anxiety, responsible pet ownership, building better behaviors. We have new topics every single month. And anyone that would like to join on any of these workshops or at some of our pet pantries that are coming up, they can go to our Facebook page, to the events tab, and see what's coming up, sign up right there, or attend those pet pantries and any of the events that we have listed.
Thank you.
That is everything. Is there any questions?
Thank you so much. You definitely have the cutest presentation all year. Thank you.
I heard we may have poodle puppies, and we're kind of kicking ourselves for not bringing them. I know.
We're going to kick you too.
Yes.
Council, any questions? Quick.
Yeah, just a quick question. There is I mentioned this to the county, and I wonder if there is a way of maybe implementing it, which is self-scanning stations. So for individuals to be able to, I mean, there's a lot of pets running around in the west side, especially, and if someone finds a dog or a cat, they can go to a specific spot where they can scan the animal and be able to contact the owner immediately, which ultimately, hopefully, saves resources and reunifies the pets faster. I would love to see some of those. And if there is a way of partnering up with the city, I hope that the city will be open to allowing for those in many of our facilities or buildings.
Well, and just to answer your question, so that actually is a popular movement in this field. So a lot of jurisdictions are working with their parks department to have these stations basically that are like solar ran. One thing we do offer you guys, so just so you know, we offer scanners. So if you want your police departments or fire departments or anything that's like a 24/7 operation, we can get them a scanner, walk them through how to look up the animal on our system. That is all available to you if they want to use it. And we have several jurisdictions that are interested in doing that. We could even have you guys have one here at your city hall. So
and we do
we're
have
happy
a
to
few
offer
scanners that we've given to the park ranger department as well. So they do have scanners available to them. But yes, any more that would like it. We even have a jurisdiction that has mosquito abatement. They have scanners, just in case.
Okay.
And we do offer training, as we don't want just anybody going up to scan an animal. So we do offer training to know when to approach, when not to approach, so that
I think it's safe to
you take your
say
safety.
we're interested in exploring that.
Right?
Staff, if you want to.
Perfect.
Thank
yeah,
you.
we could definitely do that.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here.
Perfect.
All right. We are now going to turn our attention to the fiscal year 2024-25 budget for the Metropolitan Water District preview and their property tax proposal. Sam Owen, Council Policy Analyst, is joining us online. Annalee Muncy from Metro Water, the General Manager, is joining us, as well as Tom Godfrey, everyone's favorite board chair. And then, as usual, we've got Laura Briefer here in the audience if we have any questions. So, Sam, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Council members, the item before you is a property tax increase proposal. Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy brings the proposed increase to fund critical infrastructure replacement and upgrades. The district treats and conveys water supplies that are delivered through the Salt Lake City Water Utility. That infrastructure requirements are met is indispensable for this water treatment and conveyance. Salt Lake City's partner in the district is Sandy City. For the increase to advance, the two city councils must agree. If the property tax increase does not advance, the district has signaled it would seek to meet the new revenue requirement by increasing the cost of water sales to Salt Lake and Sandy. Such an increase would come to Salt Lake City ratepayers via the water utility bill. The district would return for another check-in during a Salt Lake City public meeting after its board adopts a tentative fiscal year 2025 budget with the tax increase built in, and that's slated for April 15th. So after the board considers and potentially adopts that budget, the statute requires that the district come back and talk with you all again about the property tax proposal. The district is looking for a council decision on this before May 6, 2024. Legal review of the city's appropriate decision mechanism and other requirements is still underway at Salt Lake. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd ask to turn it over to the district. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, council members. I feel like this is kind of the second of third visits that we will have with you. The first was we scheduled a lot of virtual meetings to talk about this proposed increase so that it wouldn't come as something that you weren't aware of. As you'll recall, maybe just as introduction, I know it was made, I'm Anna Lee Muncie. I was appointed the general manager in June last year. I've been at the district for 17 years. I also want to recognize Wayne Windsor here. He's the assistant general manager and chief administrative officer, and we also have Cindy Cromer, who's also one of the trustees appointed by this council. And Tom Godfrey, as you noted, a great introduction, Chair. He has been on Metro Board since 2007, so there's a lot of wealth of knowledge that I rely on, especially as a new general manager. He's also president of the Provo River Water Users Association, and I will touch on one of their projects later, as well as he's a member of Salt Lake City's Public Utilities Advisory Committee. So as Sam really well introduced the district, we were established in 1935 to provide a long-term drinking water supply. And you can go to the next slide, I'm sorry. Thank you. The district was created in the midst of the worst drought on record. So the district was selected to be the local sponsor for the Aqueduct Division of the Provo River Project, which was a Bureau of Reclamation project. The Aqueduct Division included construction of the Salt Lake Aqueduct, which is a 42-mile, 69-inch inside diameter, mostly reinforced concrete pipe that runs from the base of Deer Creek Dam in Provo Canyon along the benches to 33rd South and I-215 in Mill Creek. So the construction of the aqueduct was completed in 1951, so it is over 70 years old. And that's one of the projects that I will be highlighting. So as noted, 7 of our board members are, we have 7 board members that are appointed by city councils. 5 of our board members are appointed by this council and 2 by Salt Lake Sandy City Council. They each serve 4-year terms that can be renewed. Next slide. Okay, so the district has 3 primary revenue sources. We have water sales to the member cities and some entities on a surplus basis. Water sales account for just over 49% of our revenue. We also collect a property tax, which equates to 23.5% of our revenue. We have assessments to the 2 cities, and this is related to new capacity, so new water supplies or new facilities. And those assessments have been set when those facilities were constructed. And then we have miscellaneous revenue. And we really strive to achieve a balance of water sales and property taxes. Next slide. So in fiscal year 24, as well in this year, we have escalating costs related to capital. A lot of the costs are related to aging infrastructure. This is a table that I shared with the council members previously. So the first project in light green is called the Cottonwoods Connection Project. This is a Metro family project, so it benefits Salt Lake City and Sandy City. It's a project that will address the aging infrastructure and the Salt Lake Aqueduct. It will improve its seismic resiliency. So our annual cost to that, when we prepared this, was $2.27 million annually. It is capital, meaning that it's for infrastructure-related costs. And this project is funded by the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. The other 3 costs are from other agencies. So the first is the Deer Creek Dam Intake Project. As I mentioned, part of the district, the Bureau had the
Provo River project, which had the dam and the pipeline. So the dam is operated, or the local sponsor is the Provo River Water Users Association. So this project will replace aging dam infrastructure that delivers 85,000 acre feet of water, or approximately 80% of the water portfolio, to the Salt Lake Valley. And the annual cost in this year's budget is $1.24 million. Again, this is a capital project related to the dam, and the Provo River Water Users Association is the funding member. The next cost is from the Jordan Aqueduct system. That entails the Jordan Aqueduct, a treatment plant, and any O&M costs related to those facilities. The Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District is going through a major project to rebuild their water treatment plant, which is located in Bluffdale, right off Mountain View Corridor. The district were 2/7 owners of those facilities, because we use those facilities to deliver water to Salt Lake City. And so their costs on average around $5 million, and they're the sponsor for those projects. And then the last one is the Central Utah project. That's for their O&M R&R, which stands for repair and replacement costs. These are expenses related to our investment in the Central Utah project water. So we have purchased 20,000 acre feet of Central Utah project water, which is mainly stored in Jordanelle Reservoir.
Madam Chair, can I ask, so does that mean Jordan Valley is contemplating a water rate increase too this year because of this project? Sorry, the one before, the Jordan Aqueduct?
They have been doing water rate increases to their member cities, correct. So this project started, I don't know when it started, but it wasn't this year. So they've been accruing rate increases to their cities.
Okay. Do you know if they're gonna do a rate increase this year too?
I have not seen their tentative budget, but I'd be happy to look into that and get back to you on that.
Yeah, I just want to, sometimes it helps to explain to the public too, like when we had to raise property taxes last year, or the year before. Yeah, year before, there were a lot of cities that had to do that too. So just explaining to residents that you know, there are those needs, and it's not just like we're trying to put the burden on one group or one city. I would be interested to know that. Thank you.
You've touched on something kind of interesting, because what we're dealing with here is state legislation for metro water districts. Other water districts in the state do not have to go through what we're going through to get approval of cities. They're, you know, because they're not metro. But those other districts seem to be raising their property tax every year. So as it slowly erodes, they don't have to worry about erosion. Our problem is ours has eroded greatly over a long period of time, as Annalee will tell you. So.
And I think we bring up a great point, Councilmember Wharton, is that a lot of our infrastructure was put in at similar time periods. And so we're all, unfortunately, hitting times where we're all having these needs to not only build it so it's resilient, but also for future growth. And so there's kind of those two demands on the infrastructure. So absolutely. I would assume, as Tom noted, that they did increase their property tax, or at least reestablished it to the 0004, which is the maximum rate that a water conservancy district can set it. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a little history on why we're asking for the property tax increase. So the district last set our tax rate, or increased it, in 2008. And at that time, we set the rate to 0035. So since then, since 2008, that rate has eroded as the value 02. What we're proposing in our 2025 budget is an increase or a reestablishment to that 0035. With reestablishing the rate, it would generate $8.6 million. So again, that still doesn't address all the costs that we're incurring for our capital as well as from other agencies, but it helps us get closer. So what I tried to show here is this is the information we received from the auditor. So in Salt Lake City,
The median market value property was $576,000. The taxable value for a home is 55% of that, or $316,000. With your tax rate, so currently, since 2008, Salt Lake City homeowners have been paying approximately $63.36 to the Metropolitan Water District. So as their value of their home has increased, the rate has gone down. So it's been a pretty steady amount from a homeowner. With the 00035 for Salt Lake City, that is a 75% increase, which would increase it to $110.88, or a net annual increase of $47. And over an annual, that's just under $5 a month that property owners in the Salt Lake Valley in Salt Lake City, would experience. Next slide. So as noted before, that reestablishing the certified tax rate at 00035 will generate $8.6 million that the district will use towards infrastructure, this aging infrastructure. To generate the same amount of money or revenue for the district, we would need to increase the water rate to both Sandy City and Salt Lake City by 36.33%. So Table 3 shows the revenue generated from the certified tax rate, and then Table 3 shows the revenue generated from the water rate. So both of them about $8.6 million. And I also want to add, the Metropolitan Water District can levy up to a 00005, so we're still well below what the maximum is, and I just want to make that point. Next slide. This is just a summary of the two tables, and as Sam noted, the Metropolitan Water District, because we represent two cities, in this situation we do need to get consensus from both city councils on a property tax increase. So if this council did not approve it, then both cities would experience an increase to the water rates. Next slide. So our budget process started in March. So last month in our work session, we presented what we expect for tentative revenue and expense projections. In our proposed tentative budget, we are including the certified tax rate. Next month, on April 15th, our board will be presented with the budget for their adoption, and that will happen on April 15th. Next slide. And as Tom noted, because of a statute that was passed in 2015, the district, in order to increase the certified tax rate, we do require approval by the legislative body of each municipality that appoints a member to the Board of Trustees under Section 17B 2A604, which means Salt Lake City and Sandy City Council, because these councils appoint our trustees, they must approve the certified tax rate. Approval must happen after we adopt our tentative budget, which will be on April 15th, but before we hold our public hearing in May. And the reason for that is if for some reason either council made the decision not to approve the certified tax rate, then we need to have a public hearing that represents the revised water rate increase. Currently, the water rate increase to both cities is 3% in our tentative budget, but as noted earlier, if the property tax were not to be approved by either council, then it would be 3% on top of the 36.33%. Consensus is required. That's part of the forming documents of the district. So we have to have equal application of the certified tax rate and the water rate. And one thing, in speaking with our board, they want to evaluate the property tax every 2 years and determine if we need to reestablish or increase that rate every 3 years. I think that was my last slide. I know you've seen this information before, but I did want to present it. This shows the timing project. The one thing that would be different is if if the councils approved the certified tax rate, Metropolitan Water District would go through that truth and taxation process. So we'd have the certified tax rate hearing and adoption of our final budget in August, and then we would have to submit it to the state auditors in September. I also want to share that we also presented this option to Salt Lake City's Public Utilities Advisory Committee, and they weighed in and also provided their support towards what Metro is proposing. So I just want to see if there's any other questions, Chair.
Thank you so much. I think you're right. It feels like everything is important all at once and requiring dollars that have to magically appear from somewhere. So none of these decisions are easy or taken lightly, but water and its availability is also a high priority as we move forward. So with that, council members. Councilmember Mono.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think I already know where I stand on this, which is I tend to be supportive of the water district's request. But I want to just talk about it in public because I thought this before I was a council member and I know I've had a lot of constituents come to me and say, why not remove the property tax altogether and just increase water rates as high as we need to, because that will encourage conservation. And I still think there's some merit to that conversation, but I also understand the concerns of that affecting low-income families far more, whereas higher income families would use as much water as they want because they can afford it, and low-income families might not have enough water to wash their clothes. So I think that this approach of sort of balanced property tax and water rate as the two ways that the water district is funded is the correct approach, but I'm just wondering, but I want to talk about it in public because I've gotten that question so much, and I'm wondering if you know of any other districts or cities or parts of the country where they do the total opposite and only do water rates, and what that looks like, and are there lessons learned for that? Does it actually increase conservation, and what does it do to low-income families? I don't know if you have that information on hand, but it's something that I thought of. I didn't think of that, both sides of that question, before I was a council member, and I've had a lot of constituents reach out to me with that, and so I just want to talk about it on the record if it's okay.
Absolutely. There has been, there was a report done by the Utah Foundation that analyzed water rates and property taxes and the purposes for both. And currently, there is also a task group that is looking at property taxes versus water rates. And that is actually was interviewed by the consultant, LRB Finance, that's looking at it. And all I can speak is to what he told me, that they have looked at other states, and other states use property taxes as well. He didn't find one state where it was only on water cells. And I think that, and we support water conservation as well. We recognize it's a precious resource. The challenge is that it's kind of like whether someone takes a long shower or a short shower, the infrastructure is the same price. And that's why we were trying to be sensitive on this issue, that this is really for infrastructure. So even if someone conserves water, it doesn't mean that the pipeline costs less money. That would be great if that turned out, but it's like the cost is set, and so we need to meet those. But we also want to conserve water because we are a dry state, and we support the member cities and the constituents in doing that, because that's a key part of the overall reduction of cost. But when we're talking about infrastructure, it's hard to just put it all on water rates because it has a fixed cost element to it. I don't know if Laura has anything she wants to add. Okay. Because she deals with it. We're a wholesaler. We're one step removed, I would say, from water conservation. And she sees their department the more the direct impacts of how do you pay for these big infrastructure if it's all on water cells.
I'm happy to expand on that, but I know time is limited too. So we have looked at the last 6 years of rate increases as part of our fiscal year 25 budget preparation. And what we found is for every dollar we raised, or every dollar we tried to raise with rate increases on usage rates, our rate realization is 41 cents. And what that means is rates can be variable, usage rates can be variable and not necessarily meet the needs of the fixed costs of running the water utility, both operationally and capital.
Thank you so much for that explanation. Council members, any other questions, concerns, comments? Do we have anything from Councilmember Dugan? Okay.
Can we go over the timeline again, when we're supposed to indicate?
By May 6th.
May 6th, okay.
And so, Sam, on this one, we don't need a public hearing. Will this be on a consent agenda, or how are we handling the voting?
Thanks, Madam Chair. The details of both the mechanism and the public hearing are forthcoming.
Okay, thank you. We'll await your timeline. Thank you. All right, thank you all. I mean, if you've got Tom Godfrey and Cindy Cromer, those are Salt Lake City's finest, so we're well represented, and thank you all for your service and protecting our water.
Thank you for your service to the city. Yes.
All right, we are 1 minute behind. How do you like that, economic development? We are killing it. So I'm going to invite now Allison Rowland with Roberta Reichelt and everyone's favorite trader, Brian Pantel, to come to the table regarding an economic development loan fund for Perea or Perea? Perea?
Perea.
Perea.
It's Greek, not Spanish. That's the problem.
Allison? Do we have Allison online?
Allison's not online, Madam Chair.
I think we can go ahead. We kind of know what the preamble to these are.
We can go ahead and start. Great. Thanks, council members. Great to be with you.
Sorry, could you turn on your mic with the button? Thank you.
Thank you, council members. Great to be with you this evening. I guess I will take over Allison's role and introduce Brian, who's going to bring to you a loan that the loan committee recommended for approval from Perea LLC. Pass it over to Brian.
Greetings, council members. It's great to see all of you, or most of you. Perea LLC is an expansion business to Manoli's over on 9th, if any of you have had the privilege of going down there. Just across the way from the Tea Grotto, if that would, yeah. This was admittedly my first loan with the Economic Development Department, and the department supported me greatly in learning the ins and outs, and I really enjoyed getting to know the system. But one of the great things about this loan, and particularly this business owner, is that not just because it's an expansion, but because the plans that he plans to bring to the assets that he brought are amazing. He owns the property that he's moving into. He is using some of his own investment in addition to the help that he's getting from the EDLF. And he plans on bringing some vibrancy to a corridor that is only growing more and more. We had the privilege of going down there with Councilmember Mano during our filming, and he glowed about how much he fought to have that as part of his district. And that whole area is springing up, and this is just another wonderful addition to that area. It also, the loan committee, in its scoring, scored this as one of the highest recommended loans that we've ever seen. So it was quite a privilege to work on this.
Do you have any questions for us?
Thank you. Council, any questions?
I'm just excited to see more new businesses on the 9 South Corridor. I love what's happening there, and all the small businesses and local businesses we're able to support there. And I love that our Economic Development Department is also involved in that.
Yes, thank you. I can't wait to go try this one. All right. Thank you for your time and attention. We made that pretty painless for you.
It seems
Thank
like
you.
they want to have some tough questions. So maybe
Did
we
you
can,
have any for him?
I mean, no. Just thank you for the work, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you guys again, as always, for your support of our small businesses.
All right, then with that, let's turn our attention to fiscal year 24-25 funding allocations for the one-year action plan for community development block grant and other federal grants follow-up. Ben Ludke, council policy analyst, will be joining us at the table. I see Heather Royal. I do not see Tony, but if we get Heather, we've got what we need, so. All right.
I think everybody has an updated funding log. You know you've got the latest if it's March 27th in the lower left corner. And you'll see throughout the funding log that the council's funding decisions are now filled in based on your previous discussions. That is in bolded blue font across all of the funding sources. On page 2, you selected Fix the Bricks for funding, which is CDBG, housing number 6. And this is being funded instead of the Community Land Trust. Today, the council office received a transmittal from the administration that has draft policies for several housing programs, including the Community Land Trust. And those policies will be coming to you for review, and they also address how to handle ongoing funding related to the Community Land Trust. On page 5, CDBG Public Services number 18. This is Shelter the Homeless. The application is to fund Miller and King Homeless Resource Centers. You'll see that the project description, the scope, has been updated so that the $30,000 would be limited to security. This came up in a previous briefing. We checked in with the applicant, and they said they do not have any concerns about making sure the funding would only be for security. And there's also 3 other applications related to these homeless resource centers that fund operations. On pages 15 through 20, this is where the $287,000 of the one-time CDBG money related to the pandemic is shown. You selected funding scenario A to use all $287,000 for public services applications. This means that 26 of the 29 applications in CDBG Public Services would receive grant awards between the 2 funding sources. I think it's fair to say that's the most awards that we have seen, since this is usually the most competitive category. You asked the administration to communicate that this is unusual and that these are one-time pandemic funds so that the recipients don't plan on also getting funding next year, since next year we'll be back to having less money for public services, so it'll be really competitive again. Just a reminder, the $30,000 minimum, multiple council members asked if that's still the right amount. And the new 5-year plan for 2025 to 2029 will evaluate if $30,000 should be adjusted. I think accounting for the cost of inflation suggests that maybe it's not enough. And several years ago, when the $30,000 was originally selected, HUD had actually recommended a higher amount at $35,000. But that amount will be looked at later this year, and it'll come back to you for approval. On page 13, this is HOPWA, number 1, the County Housing Authority's rental assistance application. This is the one where at the public hearing, the director of the County Housing Authority said they would need $550,000 to prevent housing loss for all of the households currently receiving rental assistance from that program. So that's almost $28,000 more than is recommended. The options we had at the last briefing were 3 existing funding sources that are not from HUD. One of the 3 is available. So you might remember last December voting on nonprofit local assistance grants. The council previously did grants for small businesses, and then you also did a round for nonprofits. A $100,000 grant was awarded to the Rape Recovery Center from those assistance funds. They've since come back to the city and said, we are unable to use that $100,000 for what we applied. So those funds have been recaptured, and the community and Neighborhood Development Department has submitted an item in budget amendment number 5 proposing to use almost $28,000 from those recaptured grant funds to fill the funding gap for this county housing authority program. So that's an option. I spoke with the director of the county housing authority saying there's no guarantee of additional funding. This would be subject to a future budget opening and a vote by the council. If that were to be done, it would take at least a few months. Would there be a risk of housing loss during those intervening months? No, she said. So if you wanted to pursue that, that's the one non-HUD funding option we were able to find. We did look at the annual rent assistance from Funding Our Future, and we also looked at the new $272,000 to implement part of Thriving in Place, which is a tenant relocation assistance and navigation center. Both of those funds have already gone through a request for proposal process and are in the process of being encumbered under contracts, which is why they're not available. So the question for the council, are you interested or comfortable looking at that in budget amendment number 5, or did you want to revisit the HOPWA funding today for the county housing authorities program?
Council, any feedback on that?
Madam Chair, I would propose a straw poll that we support using a portion of the recaptured local nonprofit assistance grants for Housing Connect to get them up to the $550,000 funding level so that no tenants are displaced, or tenants. No people receiving mortgage and rent assistance are displaced.
And you propose that as a straw poll?
As a straw poll, yeah.
All right. Show your feelings. That, Councilmember Dugan, all right, that is 6 in favor with Councilmember Young absent.
And I just wanted to reiterate that I know the administration is looking at how to ask earlier in the process what minimum funding level would be needed to avoid housing loss. I think we're going to continue to see this struggle in future years because the amount of money HUD is giving to the city is probably going to stay flat. Meanwhile, the cost of rent is going to go up. So those 2 trends likely suggest this will continue to be an issue.
Thank you.
We don't have final funding awards from HUD, so we're still working with estimates. On page 21 of the funding log, it lists the funding contingencies, whether the award from HUD is more than estimated or less than estimated. So the vote is scheduled for April 16th. We may or may not receive final awards from HUD before then, but I wanted to point out we do have these contingencies, which as part of the funding log would be attached to the adoption resolution. So if we don't know the night of adoption, these contingencies would dictate where the cuts or the additional funding would go. If there's no questions on the contingencies, that was all the unresolved items.
Council, any other questions, concerns? I don't think we've ever been this resolved this early. I mean, it helps when you have an extra $287,000. So next year, don't expect this. We'll be.
And there was also an extra $1.5 million in one-time home money. Like, this is one of the biggest years for HUD grants.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
I'll just say that to Ben's question that he brought up of the minimum funding level, I would be open to raising that within our next 5-year plan, just so that we're not spreading the peanut butter too thin, and that the organizations that get funding get enough that they can actually do something with it, and that we reduce the administrative costs for processing the applications. But I know we'll talk about that at a different time.
Yeah.
That just reminded me, the last time the 5-year plan was updated, I think the application process had started before the plan was finalized. And the same dynamic might happen this time, which would raise the question of, should the minimum funding amount be discussed sooner, so applicants have a heads up?
Yeah, you're correct, and that will happen again this next go around. The way that it works, our 5-year consolidated plan is due the same time as our action plan and funding recommendations for that first year of the consolidated plan. Admittedly, the timing is not great. However, we do fully anticipate bringing council into those conversations well in advance. We're already in the planning phases for the next 5-year con plan. So we will be talking about that ahead of any funding recommendations you make next year, so that you have that information to consider.
Thanks. I think the other question that goes along with what you're saying is, how do we want to divvy up what we're giving out? Because there are the very predictable, very trusted providers who make the massive asks, for whom we have a predictable impact, but there's also emerging voices that reach really specialized places. So for $30,000, maybe those larger orgs, that's not a drop in the bucket, but maybe it makes all the difference in the world for that smaller organization, for that community. And so we should have a conversation about, it's like when we talk about the developers, right? Like, how do we use our social capital, our financial capital, to make sure that we're making impact in as many ways and that we can, so.
Chair, may I echo that sentiment and share a great story? I went to visit the Geraldine King Center today and actually spoke to some of the residents and clients that sit there, and they got teary-eyed in hearing the possibilities of just having security, that the women in this facility also understand the need for intensified security in this blighted area that we've not come to know. So it really goes to great lengths, even though perhaps this amount of money doesn't seem to stretch at times. It definitely makes a long-lasting impact.
Chair,
Councilmember Puig.
Just quick question, Ben. When we're talking about the consolidated plan, the 5-year plan, is the scoring system that comes with that, is that when it's the time to reassess that scoring system or not?
Are you talking about the scoring system that the advisory board uses?
Yes.
So I think there are tweaks to that, not just every 5 years, but as we see improvements. For example, we learned this year that if housing loss is a risk, we need to know what the funding level is for that.
I see.
So that's an example of a change that we make as we realize it's an improvement. So the scoring can change.
Okay, because also it could change before the 5-year plan is addressed. Okay, that's good to me for me to understand, because much of the allocation of money is based on that score, right? And maybe to this point of smaller organizations, they might not be hitting the scores as we have them written right now, which eventually moves to recommended funding, and more cases than not, we follow the recommended funding as is presented to us. Although we made quite a bit of changes this time around, but it would be interesting to me to learn a little more about the scoring system and what categories we have and how do we define those. And I know that I don't want to insert myself in the other side of the aisle, but I would love to have some share some feedback on that.
There's also some interesting things going on with the way applications are being solicited. So, for instance, people who come from more oral traditions and come here, the written applications can be onerous, and even a good attempt at a written, especially for people in second languages, might not, for a volunteer reader, if it's more difficult to read, there might be an implicit bias that you make that that score a little lower. So I know like some entities at the state are toying with the notion of video applications where the questions are answered by narration as opposed to in written form, and other ways to just eliminate barriers. I think especially in something like this where we do need very specialized communities to be reached, we don't want to make anything too onerous, but it might be beneficial to try to even out and ameliorate implicit biases by diversifying how we accept responses.
Do we provide language services to applicants? We do?
Yep.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your work. This is the most fun and most torturous thing of the year, so we appreciate both of you, and Tony. Tell Tony we missed him.
Okay, will not be nearly as fun next year. I'm going to warn you.
All right. Look at us being 10 minutes ahead of time. Okay. All right. Okay. So we'll move ahead since we have Fraser Nelson here with us. So this is for a board appointment to the Housing Authority of Salt Lake. So, yep, if you'll join us at the table, push the button till the light comes on. We typically give a minute or two to applicants just to tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're interested in this position, and let us get to know you for a minute.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I was approached by Bill Davis. I live in the Ballpark neighborhood, and Bill and I have worked together on some efforts, and he is on, I think he's the vice chair of the Housing Authority, and he approached me and asked if I might be interested. I have spent my career here in Salt Lake working in the nonprofit and political sectors. I was the founder of the Community Foundation of Utah. I led the Disability Law Center and Justice for All. I've served on Ben McAdams' cabinet, and in that job I worked a lot with homelessness and criminal justice reform. But early in my career, I developed housing for people with AIDS. If you can remember back to a time when people with AIDS had their own housing, and that's actually how I ended up in Salt Lake City. I came here to help write the AIDS housing plan. So it's been a long time since I developed housing. But living in the Ballpark, I'm really interested in making sure that people in my neighborhood, as well as the rest of Salt Lake, have access to affordable housing. And certainly the Housing Authority of Salt Lake plays a critical role in that. I'm hoping that I can bring some of my knowledge of my neighborhood, as well as some of my background in nonprofit and social innovation work and impact financing to the role. And I was delighted to be asked and honored to perhaps have this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Council, any questions? Councilmember Romano?
Talk way too much, I'm sorry. Fraser, thank you for being willing to serve on this board. I know you, and I've been really impressed every time I've been able to talk to you. I knew for certain I didn't know everything about your amazing career, but I was really surprised to find out today that you worked on affordable housing for people with AIDS. That touches my heart. That's incredible. I can't believe I didn't know that about you, but it's something that I'm really excited to have your expertise on the Housing Authority of Salt Lake City's board.
Well, it's pretty old expertise would be a gross overstatement. It's been like 20 or more years, so.
But that's just surprising to me, and I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may add.
Yes.
I've gotten to work with Fraser, and we got introduced early on when I was still a staffer at the mayor's office, and I've appreciated your candor and diplomacy and bringing other constituents to the forefront. I think when we think of impact in the Ballpark neighborhood, that's what we want. We want our community to be uplifted in this. And so, it doesn't take a quick search to figure out Fraser's long legacy as an institutional Salt Laker. So thank you. I'm really excited for you in this position.
Oh, thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you so much for being willing to do this. We don't take anyone's willingness to serve lightly, and thank you for contributing your knowledge, your energy, all of that. You'll be on tonight's consent agenda. You do not have to be present for it, and we appreciate you.
Well, I'd be honored to serve, so thank you for considering me.
Thank you so much. So we are now at the end of our agenda. Report of chair or vice chair. Vice chair, do you have anything to report?
I do not. Thank you.
All right. Report of the Executive Director.
Sorry, I have 3 quick announcements. First, the meeting on April 16th, we wanted to ask if the body would be willing to meet beginning at 1 p.m. instead of 2. And then we also wanted to ask if you would be willing to do that during the entire budget season. That's been a standard that we've needed that extra time. And then during the budget season, we'll put the packets of information about the meeting out on Friday instead of our usual goal of Thursday, just because we need the extra time to finish our staff analysis. Then the only other item is the X4 Management Summit. Some of the council members have expressed interest in attending that. It's here locally, Wednesday, May 1st to Friday, May 3rd. And so we just are mentioning that here and asking if you would like to attend, please let your liaison know.
Thank you. Council, can we straw poll, can we show how we feel about starting at 1 p.m. on the 16th? All right, I've got 6 affirmatives. Councilmember Young, absent. And then can you show how you feel about starting at 1 during budget?
Chris?
Your thumbs are busy. Oh, I was doing them separately. Okay, so that's unanimous approval from us. Councilmember Pui.
Sorry, last year we did Tuesdays and Thursdays in some cases. I wonder if, just to anticipate, for my own sake, I prefer to know ahead of time, and I prefer maybe to front load the meetings than trying to do too many at the end. So I prefer that, I don't know if this will be a discussion for all of us, but maybe once in a while to throw a Thursday meeting in there to assume that we're going to have to need a lot later to make sure that we're not, while this beautiful building is amazing, I don't want to live in it. But, I wonder if that's a possibility to work through that.
We probably can do that. There's a ramp up time because we don't get the budget until a certain date, and
That makes sense.
So that's the only difficulty. But if we can do that, and the other council members are in agreement,
I wonder if some of the pieces of the department updates and the department presentations that do take sometimes a long time. I wonder if some of those could be scheduled, and I don't know. I wonder how
let us
all of
work
this.
on an idea what we can
And I just wanted to make sure you know that we do have some Thursdays already set aside in your calendar. So that's the last Thursday in May and 2 Thursdays in June.
So you already answered that. Okay.
Well, at least for the end. I think you're right, though. It does feel like it's a crunch at the end, and we try different things creatively all the time. I think the challenge we have of separating out the department presentations from the analysis is that frequently one informs the other, and so But we'll think about it, and if there are opportunities to do it, we'll definitely will.
That's a thought. Thank you for that.
we also hate the crush at the end, so we're with you.
Okay,
Madam
we
Chair.
need to move. Oh, yes, sir.
This wasn't related entirely to your question, but I appreciated last year the administration having kind of a standardized way that departments gave us information that really made it more digestible to me. So I don't know if that's possible again, but I'd love if it were. I would appreciate it.
All right, we need to move into a closed session for the purpose of attorney-client matters. Do I have a motion?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, and collective bargaining, discussions of collective bargaining.
Oh, sorry, that one wasn't highlighted. And for discussions of collective bargaining.
Madam Chair, I move that we go into closed session to receive the advice of counsel and to discuss collective bargaining.
Second.
Got a motion from Councilmember Wharton and a second from Councilmember Lopez Chavez. When we're done, we will be adjourned from work session. I'll roll call. Councilmember Pui?
Yes.
Mano?
Yes.
Wharton?
Yes.
Lopez Chavez?
Aye.
Dugan?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. That's unanimous. We are now in closed session.
could I walk out as a member of Team USA? And I'll never forget, I closed my eyes, and that was the vision that I thought of 900 times a day, working the hardest I could get to walk into that stadium 4 years later. And I was so lucky to be able to do that, to walk in as a member of Team USA and bring the world together, and then stand up at the top of Deer Valley and win America's first medal in those Olympics. It was just this, right? It was so fun. It was so fun. But I think more importantly, what I learned during those games is that there's this spirit called the Olympic spirit that I didn't know existed. And it brought not only the athletes together, but the community together and the world together. And I have a daughter now that's 10 and a son that is 5, and they train at our Olympic venues. And for them to now have the possibility of the Olympics being here in 2034 and the feeling that they will get, that they will have that same experience, it lights my fire within. And I'm so thankful to all of you that worked so hard for 2002 and now for 2034. So thank you so much. The Salt Lake City, Utah Olympic spirit is bright. Thank you.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be a kid when we were awarded the games here in 2002, and then was not of the age old enough to compete in 2002 like Shannon was. Sorry, I mean, I got to watch her actually, but what I was really fortunate to do was to forerun the slalom, which I was not anywhere close to being of the competitive caliber, but to see the best in the world on their biggest day, acting similar to my friends and I were at local races, was a huge realization to realize that these dreams are achievable. And then to 4 years later go on and win an Olympic gold medal in Torino was an amazing experience, a dream come true. But I think one of the coolest things about that is I was the first Utah-born and raised kid to win an Olympic gold medal in every single Olympics. Since then, we've had a new born and raised Utahn win Olympic gold medals, which I think is just amazing to show what the legacy of these games has shown over the years, is that we will have kids at these Olympics that are kids right now winning gold medals, which is amazing. And that's the legacy of 2002, and that'll be the legacy of 2034 as well, which I think is just so amazing that this community can build these kind of athletes and then build these kids' dreams. And like you said, building communities. This is amazing. This is such a cool opportunity for my kids are 3 and 6, and to have them be able to just watch the games. Who knows if they'll take part, but just it's an amazing opportunity for them and for the kids of our community here. So thank you very much.